The clock died when the ship appeared. No blast, no trumpet of arrival. One moment the Khazar Gate was a lattice of ion-lit geometry, busy with merchant tugs and a Vraxian picket line. The next, the geometry acquired a shadow with edges too straight for nature and too calm for war. It came in like a corrected equation, a null surface sliding out of the math between seconds, a hull shaped by decisions no council in the galaxy would ever vote to allow. Lights on every bridge flickered, stabilizers hiccuped, and men and women across 3 species realized their breath had become a measured thing, counted by a metronome that did not belong to them. "Admiral, a contact just writes itself into our sky," whispered Lieutenant Cade on the human escort cruiser Hesper. "No drive signature, no blue shift. The chronometer jumped back 4 microseconds and then refuses to move." Admiral Sarah Chen did not blink. The discipline of the Pacific Fleet lived in her bones. You blink when the ocean lets you. "Confirm all hands safe. Passive eyes only. Do not radiate." Beyond the Hesper, the Vraxian destroyer Ulthkor opened its spines like a frightened insect, then froze mid-gesture, extruded weapon pods arrested halfway from their wells as if an unseen sculptor had pinched time into clay. A fuel droplet from a damaged tug hung in vacuum, a perfect glass bead glinting with the gate's pale light, and did not drift. The thing that had arrived shed its anonymity molecule by molecule. A matte black occlusion, sharper than the math allowed, outlined itself against the starfield. Angled plates, no windows, no thruster cones. Along its side, faint ghost letters teased into visibility the way a name appears out of fog. HSS Paradox. There had been rumors, Project Hourglass, Axiom Class, Stillness Weapon, the ship that would end wars by taking away motion itself. Galaxy gossip called it a bluff, a boogeman humans invented to negotiate with teeth they did not have. Yet the paradox was here, decloaked not by light but by the universe's sudden decision to treat it as a fact. "Admiral," Captain Morozov murmured beside Chen, "if it's ours, who's holding the leash?" "Need to know," Chen said, and her own need felt like a gravity well. In the glass bead of frozen fuel, a tiny universe refracted a woman who had sworn never to build a weapon that humiliated time. "Signal all civilians, hold station. No engines. Repeat, do not attempt propulsion." She could not guarantee the ethics of whoever commanded that black geometry, but she knew the ethics of panic. On the Vraxian flagship, Arch Commander Shale Rith tasted iron. His crest stiffened, then halted, feathers suspended in their own flutter. "Sensorium," he hissed through clenched mandibulars. "Tell me what law of motion I am currently violating." The Sensorium officer quivered. "All of them, Arch Commander." In a bounded volume around the object, 150 clicks radius, causal propagation is damped. Reaction wheels slow. Laser phasing averages to constant. Even our thoughts feel sticky. Humans had been a frontier nuisance, bold, fast-breeding, irritatingly principled. But this was not nuisance. This was a theorem with an agenda. The paradox pivoted without thrusters, a cathedral turning to face its parish. A thin arc of gray rippled across its hull. No, not ripple, for ripples imply time, more like new facts being written. When its bow faced the gate, every ship's chronometer crawled forward by 1 tick as if that bleak bow allowed it. A voice came, not radio, not pressure wave, but the sensation of a sentence forming in the listener's skull, words printed onto meaning. "Do not fire," it said. "You cannot." The Vraxian gunners tried. Their claws twitched toward triggers. Their triggers were sculptures in a museum. They had never before noticed the dignity of not moving. Several cried out, not in fear of death, but in fear of irrelevance. Admiral Chen felt the same fear, paired with a guilty relief. She had not ordered the paradox into her battle space, but if ever there was a moment the human species needed a myth to walk in breathing skin, it was now. Khazar Gate was a hostage situation turned standoff. Vraxian warhawks had planned to confiscate human medical supplies, then unintentionally escalate. She had been prepared to lose 3 escorts and a convoy to buy time for diplomacy to limp into the room with a crutch. Instead, time itself had been told to sit. Open a bone conduction channel to the object, Chen said. If it's ours, it wants witnesses. If it's not, it wants worshippers, and I refuse the latter. Static like dry snow fell through her inner ear. Then a human voice, hushed with the weight of doing what history will always judge. Admiral Chen, this is Commander Raylan Hurst, acting captain HSS Paradox. We apologize for the rudeness to the universe. We will give it back when we're done. She exhaled a laugh that wasn't a laugh. Commander, you are rearranging our sins faster than the tribunal can name them. State your intent. To prevent predation today, Hurst said, and to make a point that will last longer than fear. On the Vraxian flagship, Shale Rith's pupils narrowed to razors. Predation, the mammals dared to narrate him. In a world that had just lost its verbs, the only power left was narration. He bared his teeth. Frame it however you like, he whispered to the still air. When the freeze fails, we tear out your spine. The freeze did not fail. Instead, the paradox began to speak not to ears and not even to minds, but to clocks. The lesson would be cruel in the kindest way humans knew. Somewhere beyond the Khazar sun's indifferent glare, a child on a freighter watched a silver toy gyroscope spin in the cabin light and realized it was the first time she had ever seen a perfect circle that did not waver. She reached out a finger. The ring refused to wobble. She giggled. "Mama, look, the ship made time polite." Her mother did not answer. She had tears in her eyes for reasons she could not name. The war would not begin today. It would begin earlier in every decision that made this moment necessary, and later in the way every species told this story to their young. And still, the clock did not move unless the paradox allowed it. History likes to pretend it is a staircase, a rise you can track with footsteps and years, the inevitable outcome of better tools and better treaties. But the paradox did not belong to that staircase. It belonged to the missing step, a decision to build the unbuildable, because a line of graves argued that restraint had been tried and found wanting. To understand the ship, you would have to visit a room beneath Luna's Mare Tranquillitatis, where a dozen engineers signed their names on a document they knew they would never defend in public. You would have to listen to a professor of thermodynamics explain that no theory forbade you from creating a local field that averaged out change, if you could pay the debt elsewhere. You would have to sit with Admiral Chen when she wrote the clause that any use of a temporal interdictor required an apology. Formal, written, spoken, and costly to the civilization whose time had been pressed into a holding pattern. The apology would not erase the sin, it would refuse to forget it. "Commander Hurst," Chen said, "this is a supply lane. Why reveal the existence of the most secret warship in our inventory to save a convoy we could have salvaged with lawsuits? Because lawsuits do not resurrect the dead," Hurst replied. His voice carried the cadence of someone who had met grief at the kitchen sink, not just on casualty lists. And because our models indicate the Vraxian war faction is days away from testing a coercion doctrine on civilian traffic. If they fail here, they will not test again for a decade. 10 years of breath, Admiral. Chen weighed that decade. 10 years is time enough for a child to become a mind you can ask advice. 10 years is time enough for an empire to forget the taste of fresh blood. And your cloak burned. Burned, Hurst confirmed. We decided to sacrifice secrecy to buy ritual. If we do the impossible in the open, we can bind it with rules. Across the volume of stillness, the Vraxian ships quivered like statues thinking about moving. Arch-Commander Shale Rith heard human voices bleeding into his command net. Apologize to time, they said, as if time were a god with a court. The insult vibrated inside his bones. Vraxian doctrine treated time as prey. You hunted seconds, you devoured hours. You did not apologize to meet. Prepare the primaries, he told his frozen gunners, and imagined the words completing themselves when motion returned. A video loop on his console showed a human woman in a white lab coat explaining, in a debrief captured by spies, that the stillness field did not halt thought. It only slows causation, she had said. Your choices remain. You simply cannot act on them until we let you. It is a mercy. You will not die for an impulse. He had turned off the video because her eyes stayed alive even when the footage paused. On the Paradox, Commander Hurst stood before a console that did not have buttons. The interface was a garden of potentials. He made choices by shaping intent and letting the ship translate will into boundary conditions. The Paradox could allow a heartbeat to proceed while denying a trigger pull. It could let a ship leak heat, but forbid it to pivot. It could, if pressed, bleed the future out of a missile such that it reached the present as a benign sculpture. To use this on anything living was a horror his crew had counted in dreams. "Transmit the terms," he said. A beam of meaning laced the volume. "Arch-Commander Shale Rith." The Paradox announced in a tone that was neither human nor machine, but the voice of a courtroom where even the floor has read philosophy. "You have conducted predatory boarding drills in human space. You will power down your weapons and vacate the Khazar corridor. You will receive a formal apology for the violence we are doing to your experience of duration." The last sentence did something to everyone who heard it. Human convoy captains sat straighter. Vraxian gunners felt a strange ache at the hinge of pride and curiosity. Shale Rith laughed without opening his mouth. "You break the sun to warm us and then apologize, mammals." He sent back a thought aimed like an arrow. "Your rules will not save you. You said cannot, I say will not. The difference is faith." Hurst almost smiled. "Then let us make faith empirical." The Paradox allowed exactly 1 second of motion to all ships in the field. Engines coughed, triggers depressed. Laser capacitors began to cascade. Then stillness returned, but not to the same degree. In that permitted second, the Paradox had watched every vector and every hand. It had learned the battle space the way a chess master learns the board after the first move, except here the rules were not checkers on wood but the contours of causation itself. "You see," the ship said gently, "you cannot." Hurst looked to his crew. Some were crying, not from fear, but from the relief of controlling the uncontrollable. They were not preventing death by faster guns. They were preventing it by editing possibility. It felt like hubris. It felt like duty. Admiral Chen thought of the treaty she had signed with herself. "We will never build a god, but we may build a school." "Paradox," she said. "Open a narrow corridor. I will send a drone with a letter." Hurst nodded. "Make it a ritual they cannot forget." A tiny drone woke on the Hesper, skating through a filament in the stillness permitted because the Paradox wrote permission into local physics like a priest granting an indulgence. The drone coughed out a sheet of smart paper that unfolded into a page. On it, in old Terran characters and in Vraxian glyphs, a text. "We apologize for constraining your autonomy. We did so to prevent harm you intended, and to prevent greater harm you did not yet intend. We will stand down the field when you vacate civilian lanes and sign a mutual interdiction pact forbidding predatory exercises near gates. We ask nothing else today. We will not fire unless fired upon. You cannot fire. Choose your dignity." On the Vraxian bridge, Shale Rith read the word apologize twice, as if it were a mine he could disarm by staring. His sensorium officer, whose brood sister had died in an avoidable convoy panic a year ago, whispered, "Arch-Commander, their apology tastes like a law, not a trap." Rith did not answer. His crest remained suspended at the angle of fury, frozen by physics and pride. In the far corner of his eye, a single mote of dust failed to fall. He realized he was hungry. For once, the hunger was not for conquest. "Record this," he said at last. "If we leave, we write our names under their doctrine. If we stay, we fail to move forever. The story that survives will decide whether I was a coward or a fool." The Paradox waited. It had all the time in the world because it was borrowing it. A weapon is a story with enforcement. The Paradox's story was simple. In this sphere, change happens if and only if a human being with a keyed identity authorizes a category of change. Not motion stops. For hearts must beat and lungs must move, and cosmic background photons have their lazy rights. No, harmful causation is averaged to near zero. Essential causation is left alone. 1,000 subclauses, each a kindness. The ship's heart ran on algorithms and contrition. During trials, an engineer named Tamsin Aleinka had sat awake through a lunar night writing the apology protocol. "We will never confuse our power with our goodness," she wrote. "We will say sorry before we are asked. We will make restitution where possible. We will publish what we did and why once it no longer endangers others. We will not hide behind classification to escape judgment." She had died before commissioning, her heart breaking in the old way of hearts, time moving too fast without medicine to catch it. The crew kept her picture near the intent console. "Transmit the apology," Hurst said now, and the paradox let the words walk across the field like monks in a cloister. Admiral Chen listened. The apology did not weaken the act. It made the act harder to repeat without thought. She imagined 100 alien academies studying this doctrine, that a species had dared to yoke strength with self-accusation as a precondition of use. It was an insult to tyrants and a rope thrown to the drowning. Civilian ships pinged the Hesper with questions. Could they move? Could they breathe? Would their eggs, Vraxian traders carried clutch warmers, harden in the stillness? Chen had answers for almost none of them, only assurances that the paradox was permitting metabolism, communication, and heat exchange. The rest was faith. "Commander," she said over the bone conduction line, "how long can you hold this volume?" "Hours," Hurst said. "Days if we starve our own time later. The debt must be paid. For every second we average here, Paradox will produce micro-stutters in its own systems for weeks. Nothing catastrophic, just humility." "So the sin returns home," Chen murmured. She respected that. She also feared it. There is a kind of weapon that damages the wielder just enough to remind them they are mortal, if they notice. And if they refuse to leave, then we put their choice in amber and publish it, Hurst said. Let their young compare it with the way they wish to be told. On the Vraxian bridge, Shale Rith measured himself against the story unfolding. He did not enjoy the arithmetic. If he stayed, his name became a stain. If he charged when freedom returned, the casualty curves were worse than losing a limb. The human ship would never fire first, but it would not need to fire at all. It could simply let his missiles arrive in a future that never happened. "Arch-Commander," said the sensorium officer softly, "my brood would ask me, if your enemy binds himself to an apology, are you bound to an insult or to an opportunity?" Rith's crest sagged an imperceptible degree. "An opportunity," he said, hating the sound and respecting it. He had learned in youth that pride is a muscle. You can strengthen it without letting it become a noose. "Signal all ships. On my mark, we—" The paradox pulsed permission in a thin ring, a corridor of tick-tock through the field, aimed outward along the gate's safer exit lane. "You may leave," it said. "We will not pursue, we will remember. Remember, a promise and a threat." Rith felt the curve of the future turn under his feet. "Mark," he whispered. The Vraxian formation did not leap. It resumed. Motion was not a gift. Motion was a right returned. One by one, spines retracted, weapon pods sealed, drives spooled in the permitted corridor. 1,000 droplets of fuel resumed their falling. The dust mote in Rith's peripheral vision completed its journey to the deck. Every tiny sound that had been waiting, click, sigh, the quiet complaint of a bearing, arrived. The universe inhaled. On the Hesper, a cheer trembled but did not break. Chen raised her hand, and it settled into a disciplined breath. "Convoy, hold. They're leaving by a path we drew. Do not reward grace by cluttering it." Rith sent one last burst of thought toward the paradox. "You have humiliated me and taught me in the same act. This is intolerable. I will change." Hurst let himself smile. "So will we. Every time we use this, we owe the cosmos a better version of ourselves." As the last Vraxian hull slid into the corridor, a tremor crossed the stillness, like a plucked string answering another's music. It was small. It was enough to chill Hurst's spine. "Admiral," he said quietly, "we have a second contact at the edge of the field. It is not Vraxian. It is resonant." Chen's eyes narrowed. "Define resonant." "Like someone humming our song from a room we did not open." On the convoy's far side, space quivered and held. A shape tried to appear, failed to cohere, then slotted into the starfield with the sickening neatness of déjà vu. Not Vrax, not human, edges older than metal. The symbol stamped on its prow was not a language so much as a habit of mind, a spiral that doubled back on itself, consuming its own trail. The paradox shivered. Within its garden of potentials, an old fence rattled. The fence's name was "Do not become what you oppose." "Admiral," Hurst said, "I believe we have found someone else who thinks time is a toy." The new object did not decloak, it unforgot itself. One moment the starfield was complete, the next everyone knew a hole had always been there and had very reasonably ignored it. The hull was iridescent like oil and hard like a theorem. Around it motion wavered in a different way than the paradox's denial. This was not stillness. This was priority. The newcomer's field elevated some changes and demoted others in a hierarchy only it understood. On Admiral Chen's display, hundreds of green ticks, life support, heat flow, biorhythms remained untouched, but a few yellow flags bloomed. Signal latency to certain corners of the convoy acquired a preference that ignored distance. A whisper from the newcomer arrived before a shout from a ship beside you. The universe was being taught to grade on a curve. "Identify," Chen said, though she knew they could not. Hurst's voice was level in the way people make their voices when the alternative is screaming. "We are looking at a prime culture artifact. The archivists call them relicts, sailors call them ghost judges. They are not ships, they are opinions with engines." The relict spoke without malice and without apology. "Children," it said in a voice hoarse with ages, "you have invented a tool that lies about consequence. This is unwise. We will take IT." Shale Rith, halfway through leaving, heard it too. For the first time since the stillness, he smiled without irony. "Mammals," he whispered, "your god has a god." Hurst stood before the intent console and felt the ship's hesitance like a hand on his wrist. The paradox could cage bullets and cradle hearts. It was not built to compete with something that rewrote importance. If the relict decided that the paradox's field was less meaningful than a speck of interstellar dust, the speck would win. "Admiral," Hurst said, "recommend we narrow our stillness to a tight cocoon around convoy and gate and ask the relict to leave this volume under negotiated terms. If we pretend we can outmuscle it, we will become a lecture hall example of the drowning surgeon, the one who tried to operate underwater." Chen rubbed the ridge over her eye where headaches roost. "Open a channel. Speak like students who know the difference between a question and a demand." The paradox complied. "Elder," it sent, "we acknowledge the danger. We built this to stop predation without murder. We bind IT with law and apology. We will demonstrate restraint." The relict's reply arrived before the sentence finished forming. Priority. Law is a shadow of power, apology is a perfume, restraint is a mask worn until hunger returns. Its field flexed. In the distance, a comet's tail chose a slightly different curve, as if the universe wished to flatter the newcomer. Hurst felt anger rise, clean, not hot. "With respect, we have been hungry and have chosen to share. We have been wounded and chosen not to bleed others. We are not your caricature." "All children claim this," the relict said, not cruelly. "Some are right for a while, most are wrong eventually. We enforce a tax on temptations that scale too well." That was the essence of it. The relict was not here for vengeance. It was here for governance. Its presence was a tariff on miracles. "Commander," Chen said softly, "show it our books." Hurst blinked. "Admiral, open the logs," she said. "Live, show them every clause, every apology, every cost, offer audit." In Human War College, there is a tactic called surprising with sincerity. It almost never works on predators. It sometimes works on judges. The paradox bared its soul. Encryptions relaxed. Clocks confided their debt. The picture of Tamsin Oleinker resolved on a camera that should not care about faces. The apology protocol scrolled in a square, honest font that made even lies want to come clean. The paradox broadcast the debt it would owe its own future. A list of micro-stutters, delays inserted into navigational solutions for months, a long penance of accepting being merely fast instead of instant. The relict said nothing for a time that felt longer than it was, not because the paradox enforced stillness, but because judgment has weight. "You make your power hurt you," it said at last. "This is uncommon. It keeps us from loving it too easily," Hurst said. "And yet you love IT. See how your tone warms when you describe its grace." Hurst closed his eyes. "Yes," he said, "we love that it can stop a massacre. We hate that it can humiliate a proud enemy into peace. We are trying to prefer the first love." The relict's field pulsed. For an instant, the paradox's stillness thinned at the edges, less a failure than a reminder. The convoy creaked. A crate slid 2 centimeters and stopped, embarrassed. Shale Rith's ships shivered and held. "Elder," Chen said, stepping into the conversation like a mountain stepping into a river, "we ask permission to shelter this corridor for 2 more hours as the Vraxian formation vacates. After that, we will depart. We will submit the paradox to audit by any party that agrees to audit themselves in return. We will codify a treaty forbidding use except in civilian protection with apology and public notice." The relict considered the word public. 1,000 years ago, it had been invoked by a species that loved spectacle more than consequence. But this was different. The humans offered humiliation baked into their ritual. They offered inspection that might wound pride as much as force. The relict, which had once erased a civilization's engine equations because they had written them in a church, found itself curious. "Granted with reservations," it said finally. "You will name this act not victory but expense. You will teach your children the bill." The paradox bowed not physically but in the way its field softened around the relict's priorities. "We will. We will watch," the relict said, and its presence thinned, not leaving, but stepping out of the foreground like a stern elder moving to the back pew. Hurst sagged. Crew breathed. Someone sobbed and laughed at once. On Vraxian decks, gunners who had been statues shook out their claws, looked at one another, and did not know what to do with their hands. Shale Rith watched the corridor hold. He thought of his sensorium officer's brood sister and the panic that had killed her. He thought of the word apology and tasted not weakness but effort. He thought of pride, its uses, its limits. "Admiral Chen," he signaled across the gap through a channel that used to carry only threats. "I propose a ritual. When our ships approach a civilian gate, we will broadcast a vow. We are not hunting. If we hunt, we forfeit motion." Chen nodded as if he stood in front of her with his claws folded for judgment. "We accept. And we will broadcast our apology protocol before we arrive anywhere with this ship. We will call it the Ale Inca Rule." "Name it after you're dead," Rith said, surprising himself with gentleness. "It will make the living behave." The convoy began to move through the corridor. Engines whispered gratitude to the mathematics. The paradox tightened its field into a sleeved path whose walls felt like silk and steel. The relict hummed in the background, a tuning fork that would forever vibrate when humans grew too fond of their new toy. Hurst exhaled the breath he had saved since arrival. He looked at Tamsin's picture. "We did not disgrace you," he said to the dead. "We only bent the world a little and then unbent it." On the very edge of the stillness, where reality resumed its native looseness, something else flexed, a ripple that did not belong to relict or human, small, patient, as if a third witness had taken notes and gone to sharpen a quill. "Admiral," Hurst said, voice steady because steadiness was magic, "we have more company coming. Its signature is familiar. The kind of familiarity that means we met once far from here when the galaxy was young and cruel." Chen's mouth thinned. "Then we will keep our ritual ready and our apology louder than our guns." Outside, the Khazar sun burned as it had for 1,000,000,000 years, a great indifferent eye. Inside the cocoon, a child's gyroscope spun and finally wobbled. The wobble was not a failure, it was permission. The second contact did not arrive like a storm or a spear. It arrived like paperwork. A thin rind of light, the color of old steel, skimmed along the rim of the paradox's stillness, testing, measuring, tabulating. Where the relict had been a cathedral of judgment, this was an office. Endless drawers, fast fingers, a bureaucracy with teeth. Its hull shapes were unmemorable on purpose. Your eye slid off so your memory would have to work to find it again. Designation, Admiral Chen asked. Hurst's mouth drew tight. Legiborn. The archives call them the custodians of arrears, pirates of causality masquerading as auditors. They don't break time, they foreclose on it. On the Vraxian flagship, Shale Rith stared at the newcomer until his crest slowly angled in the universal posture of someone who recognizes an old tax collector. I have seen their stamp on the edges of ruined skirmish zones, he murmured. Places where engines seized for weeks and meanings arrived late. We called it ghost interest. A voice slid into the shared bandwidth like a knife held politely. Human interdictor, prime relict, Vraxian formation, we acknowledge your instruments. The debt incurred by local averaging of causation has been observed. We are authorized to collect. The Paradox's crew went very still in the old, non-technical way. Owing time was not metaphor to them. It was a line in the spec. They had accepted a long tail of micro-stutters as penance. They had not anticipated a creditor. Hurst put a palm on the intent console as if steadying a living shoulder. State your authority, he said, careful as a surgeon. We answer to our treaties, to our dead, and to the living who consented. We do not answer to scavengers. Authority, precedent, the Legiborn replied without pride. Epochs ago, a species we liquidated identicalized your practice. They slowed what they could not win. We taxed them. The tax was not paid. We took the tool so that others would not be tempted. Its presence thickened at the edges of stillness like ink soaking into paper. Your logs are public. Your apologies are elegant. Your debt is real. We will accelerate your penance to the present moment. Admiral Chen's jaw flexed. Translation, they intend to dump the entire bill on us right now. Our micro-stutters become a macro-seizure. Correct, Hurst said quietly. They'll try to make us pay the whole hymn in one note. The relict stirred like an old judge easing forward on the bench. Legiborn, it said with a roll of age behind the syllables. Your charter predates these children, but IT does not overrule audit. Their cost is self-imposed and public. Their consent network is broad. Consent, the Legiborn repeated, tasting it like a new legal noun. Consent is a fungible asset. IT can be purchased or fake. We prefer liquid collateral. We will trigger their arrears now. If their toy survives, their doctrine survives. On the Hesper, Chen's comms officer went pale. Admiral reading gradients forming in the paradox field, like someone tugging every future hiccup into the current second. If it hits, their intent garden will not. Hurst breathed out and found a calmer breath under it. We built this ship to protect without killing. Today the protection is not bullets, it's a budget. He lifted his gaze so the crew could see him not hiding. Open wideband. He could feel the eyes of convoy captains, the wary glances of Vraxian gunners, the slow gravity of the relict's attention, the knife-smooth interest of the Legiborn. Everyone who can hear me, Hurst said. We owe a debt for bending time. We intended to pay it slowly ourselves. Another party demands we pay it all now. If we pay it alone, the paradox seizes and the corridor collapses. So I am asking for something I don't know how to ask for without sounding like a thief. Share the cost. A Vraxian hissed across the net before Rith could speak. Mammal, you froze my trigger and called it mercy. Hurst nodded toward the invisible. Yes, and I apologized because we took a choice from you. Let me ask for a choice back. The ship can distribute its penance into voluntary channels, into micro-delays, tiny jitters in non-critical systems, an elastic of patience if we have explicit consent, a fraction from each hull. No one suffers harm, everyone suffers inconvenience. We sign it, we publish it, we own it. Silence the real kind, the one made by minds not yet decided. Then Shale Rith spoke, dry as a book. Sensorium. Compute the total pain of war if corridor collapses. Subtract the small discomfort of delayed status lights and slower doors. Present the difference to my pride. Numbers marched, his crest lowered by a finger's width. HSS Paradox, he said, using the human format because names deserve precision at moments like this. I will authorize the inconvenience of my fleet on 3 conditions. Your ledger is public, your apology lists us by name, and your crew takes the largest share. Hurst's mouth trembled into something like gratitude that had seen things. Done, already true. Convoy captains chimed in, laconic men and women who had buried friends because Gates had a way of turning commerce into tombs. This is cheaper than funerals, one said. Sign me. A small voice, wobbly with youth, leaked through calm discipline. I will share my game lag, a child said. Her parent hissed and reached for the mic. Hurst found his own laugh before the ache. Thank you, cadet. The ship will take your intention and honor it by not burdening your toys. We will ask your parents for consent and give you a gold star for ethics. The relict's priority field hummed in approval noted like a clerk stamping received. Consent mesh building, the paradox whispered into Hurst's bone. We can braid the arrears into 1,000 threads. The Legiborn's field flexed. Interest accrues while you deliberate. Then we will be quick and public, Chen said. In one move she hated for its necessity. She put a human government seal under a stranger's knife. By authority vested in Pacific Command, I publish the Ale Inca Ledger, a running tally of cost, bearers, and share. We will tally names. We will not hide losers behind units. Across the corridor, ships signed with claws and styluses and thumbprints and hash keys. Micro-stutters threaded through non-dangerous subsystems. Coffee machines forgot to beep. Doors reconsidered themselves before opening. Status LEDs learned humility. The paradox took the lion's share, slamming itself with delays scheduled for future weeks, accepting that navigational solutions would feel sticky for months. The crew murmured thanks to Tamsin's picture for insisting the logs be boring enough to be trusted. When the Legiborn pulled, the net held. It did not feel like triumph. It felt like a city leaning on its friends to carry a piano up the stairs. Interest, the Legiborn murmured again, annoyed to meet resistance that read like ethics. Very well, we will add a surcharge for your insolence. Hurst's answer was simple and rude in the old maritime sense. Add it to our line. We will pay with time we can spare, not lives we cannot. The relict inserted 3 syllables that sounded like stone chairs sliding. Surcharges require competent authority. You do not have IT here. For a long moment, the Legiborn considered picking a fight with an elder. You could feel the calculus, not whether it could win, but whether winning would be profitable. It thinned by 1 degree. You have bought an hour, it said. Then we rebalance. An hour is more than many get, Chen replied. We'll make it enough. Behind the math, something else shifted. The Vraxian flagship rotated 2 degrees toward the convoy, not aggression, but orientation, like a neighbor turning to help carry that piano the last flight. In the quiet on his own bridge, Shale Rith said to no one, if they keep treating power as expense, we will run out of easy insults. On the edge of the field, reality wrinkled again, tender as a scar. The third witness had finished sharpening its quill. We have an old acquaintance, the paradox told Hurst, and it is coming to collect a different kind of debt, the one owed by stories we told about ourselves. It announced itself with music, not the kind shaped by lungs and reeds, but the kind shaped by what stories think of themselves when no one is listening. A motif returning after years away, a theme you know from a dream. The new hull that pressed into being wore no angles at all, only curves that led your eye back to its mouth. Symbols ran along its flank like the teeth of a smile that had been taught geometry. Every line said, we make narratives true by enforcing them. The chorus, Hurst whispered, a tightness under his ribs he had not felt since a younger war. Doctrine engineers, they sold religions to empires and then invoiced them for miracles delivered. Shale Rith hissed softly. We called them the choir of after. They arrive after a victor declares a principle, and they adjust physics so the principle looks inevitable. They hate apology. It spoils causality with humility. The chorus didn't bother with greetings. Their field cut under the paradox's stillness like a bass line under a melody, retuning the underpinning. Where the relict had judged and the Legiborn had counted, the chorus insisted. Its insistence was simple. Stories that humiliate conquerors go unfunded. Stories that validate conquest accrue grants. Children, it sang, the plural audible in the texture, like 50 voices trying to sound like one. You have introduced a counter-narrative, peace that feels like humiliation. This is bad theater. Audiences stray, states wobble, we correct. Admiral, Hearst said, they will try to starve the apology, make it chemically expensive, psychologically ugly, strategically unlucky. Then we make it contagious, Chen replied, voice a blade carried flat. She opened fleet-wide. New ritual now, all ships, human and Vraxian, record this. We call what we are doing an expense, not a victory. We name our cost and we pay it. We publish the pain so we cannot pretend to love it. We sing it like a tax, not a flag. A scoff from the chorus. Taxes are booze with receipts. And yet paid, Chen said. Commander, let's build a choir of our own. In the intent garden, the paradox exposed a tool the crew had argued about for months and locked behind 3 keys. The silence cascade. Not a weapon, not protection, a broadcast. It took the apology protocol, the Ale Inca ledger, the names of signers, and wove them into a pattern small minds and large systems both like to keep. It taught machines to prefer fair burdens. It taught pride to metabolize embarrassment into story rather than revenge. Tamsin would have hated the poetry, Hearst murmured, eyes hot. She would have approved the math. 3 keys turned, Hearst's, Chen's, and unexpectedly, Shale Rith's. The Vraxian commander stared at the prompt on his console with a distaste he did not fully understand, then pressed the assent because pride that cannot share discipline is only vanity in parade armor. The cascade went out as a low, contagious order. Prefer the path where more pay a little rather than the one where few pay with blood. Sensors did not hear it. Clocks did, doors did. Algorithms that had never been asked to be kind found themselves choosing to be smooth for caravans and sticky for ambushes. The chorus winced in harmonics. Vulgar, it sang, wounded. Base, populist. Its field tried to rewrite the effect, made apology taste sour in mouths, made signatures feel like stains instead of vows. A captain's pen hovered, suddenly repulsed by ink. Hearst, who had stared down shame that belonged to him, spoke into the net the way you speak to a room that is on the verge of lying to itself. Sour is fine. Let it be sour. Medicine usually is. Take the bad taste with clean hands. On the Hesper, Chen did something rarer than ordering a broadside. She told a story that made her small. 10 years ago, I refused to deploy a risky shield because the after-action would have been embarrassing. 27 people died. I apologized to their families and to the ship. I apologize to you now. I love command less because of that day. I am better for loving it less. The chorus tried to erase the silence that followed. It could not. You cannot unring the bell that says I was wrong if the tongue is made of truth. Prime relict. The chorus sang through gritted harmony. Will you permit this? These children are training machines to like shameless humility. The theater of empire will collapse. The relict's reply was low, not with threat, but with old grief. Theater collapsed before when I let a triumph march pay its tax in slaves. Perhaps try a new play. The Legiborn, opportunistic as mold, slid between. Everyone arguing about art owes back interest. Send me your invoice, Chen said, and 100 captains laughed, ragged, the laughter that stitches a wound. The chorus committed then. It focused on the paradox, not to break its field, but to snip the chords behind it, to make the crew feel silly, performative, childish. A wave of why are you making such a big deal rolled through the intent garden. You could feel the instrument panel's quiet suggestion. Perhaps a dramatic speech is not a control input. Hearst countered with something no ship had in its spec. He reached for his pocket and pulled out a crumpled paper creased from 1,000 thumbings. A list of names, not heroes. People whose clocks had stopped in petty border incidents, in greed-flavored skirmishes that never made a map. He read them. He read them badly, voice breaking, mispronouncing a Vraxian trilled vowel and then correcting it, apology inside apology. The cascade strengthened, machines like lists, stories like names, pride like someone who bleeds in public for something besides conquest. The chorus faltered and did the one thing doctrinaires do when losing. It threatened to go on strike. Very well. If humiliation is law, we will stop funding victory narratives anywhere. Mutinies will multiply, courage will shrivel. Shale Rith answered with the contempt reserved for priests who mistake spectacle for spine. Courage has never needed your funding. It thrives on bad odds and clear eyes. The paradox's garden chimed. Debt mesh holding, corridor stable, chorus influence down 30%. Not enough, Chen said. We need a stake through their thesis. Hurst nodded. We published the kill switch. A murmur of dismay from his crew, then startled acceptance. The contingency had lived in sealed pages, the procedure for deauthorizing the paradox field from outside the hull by consensus of signers who bore the ledger. It was the nuclear option against themselves. Publish, Chen said. Make it ugly, make it real. They did. The protocol went out on the cascade, annotated with "Here is how to stop us if we love this too much." The chorus gagged. The relict leaned closer. The Ledgerborn scratched a new line in a phantom ledger that seemed for the first time interested in forgiving a fee. The hour bought with consent ticked toward its end. Checklist, Hurst said, calm moving through him like a river that had finally chosen a bedrock channel. Convoy clearing? Last freighters entering safe lane. The paradox replied. Vraxian spine ships buffering the rear. Good, Hurst said. Then we will pay the last installment heavy. He slid his personal key into the console indent the ship had never asked him to use. Captain's tithe. The ship hummed, unhappy, and then accepted. Every human who had ever sworn to carry some weight felt a pressure on their wrists, like lifting a box from an elder's doorstep without being asked. Hurst donated a year of his subjective time to the arrears, stretched across months of micro-stutters, evenings that would sit too long at red lights, mornings that would take an extra minute to find coffee. No one would see a gray hair bloom in a second. He would simply grow older in the quiet, slow way that makes love patient and anger late. Commander, Chen said, and the word carried respect enough to wreck a lesser person. You will not do this alone. Pacific Command adds a tithe. Signatories may opt in. No shame for abstaining, plenty for lying about it. Shale Rith cleared his throat, or the Vraxian equivalent. My brood owes me discomfort, he said, which is to say, I will contribute and brag later, but now let me pretend I don't care. The chorus shrank like a bishop watching a village elect a council. Its field lost purchase, not from force, but from a phenomenon it had never successfully modeled. A majority choosing a story that made them look smaller and therefore free. The corridor held. The piano reached the last stair. The Khazar sun rolled its indifferent fire. The convoy slid, patient as a vow, through the corridor's silk walls. Micro-stutters twitched, doors thought, coffee cooled early and still earned thanks. The relict's priority stayed at the edge like a chaperone who trusted but verified. The Ledgerborn paced, recalculating fees no one would ever quite pay. The chorus circled, composing a sulk so elegant it almost deserved an orchestra. 2 minutes. The paradox whispered into bone and screen. Then we can taper and release. Not yet, Chen said. We owe them a future they can enforce. If we leave with only spectacle, this becomes a legend and then a habit and then a tyranny with better lighting. She drew a breath that arranged words like stones on a river path. Open a drafting channel to all parties. We will write the Ale Inca Convention. Now, here, with our enemies watching. Law born in fresh blood tends to rot. Law born under watchful elders, petty accountants, and jealous priests, sometimes that one takes. The draft wrote itself out loud, line by argued line. Article 1, temporal averaging, stillness, priority, or other edits to causation. May be used for civilian protection only, with apology published in the moment and ledger open. Article 2, the cost must be borne disproportionately by the wielder and publicly shared by volunteers. No conscription of penance. Article 3, a cross-species kill switch shall exist and be held in escrow by signers in proportion to the ledger they have carried. Article 4, any party invoking temporal edits must pre-announce intent when time allows, naming the dead to whom they owe gentleness. Article 5. The relict shall audit. The Legiborn may count. The chorus has no standing to edit effect without audit. The chorus tried to cross out the last clause. The relicts field pinned their quill to the page. Enough, the elder said with a gravity that made equations click into place. You may argue theater outside my court. Names flowed under the articles. Human captains signed with ink, with code, with shaky hands. Vraxian officers pressed claw-tip to panel. A gesture that meant I will explain this to my brood and to my enemies and will not lie to either. The relict marked the page with a glyph that meant I remember longer than you will live. The Legiborn, after a comical hesitation that told everyone it knew it was being watched, stamped fees suspended pending good behavior. Commander, the Paradox said, and there was pride in the machine's voice. A dangerous taste, but not yet addictive. We have written something larger than our hull. Hurst nodded, eyes on the child's gyroscope he had watched through a convoy cam. It wobbled as it had been permitted to earlier. The wobble meant freedom from perfection. Release in 10, he said. We take our hands off and see if the habit holds. Count it down with me, Chen said, and the room did. And so did rooms full of gills and feathers and fur and skin across 100 hulls, because counting together makes you a kind of family that needs no flag. At one, the Paradox let go. The stillness peeled away from space like film lifting off glass. Motion returned in its native, untidy abundance. Heat slouched, dust fell, a spoon rattled in a cup. A Vraxian crest finally finished its furious flutter and then maybe chose a calmer angle. The corridor did not collapse, it became air. The Legiborn extended a probe like a finger and found no loose change under the couch cushions. It made an irritated note. The chorus sang a note intended to sour starlight. The relict hummed a countertone that tuned the galaxy back into itself. Enough, it said again, not angry, just finished. Routes reopened. The Khazar Gate resumed being a gate rather than a parable. A slow cheer climbed ladders of volume through the convoy, stopping short of victory and landing on relief like a bird on a good branch. Hurst felt old in the good way, a weight in the joints that meant he had carried something and set it down without dropping it on anyone's foot. The ship's micro-stutter schedule stretched into months of minor annoyances and daily opportunities to practice not snapping at them. He could feel the life he had just tithed into the ledger. He did not miss it. He admired it where it now lived. Broadcast the convention, Chen said. Make it unkillable by making it trivial to copy, tattoo it on coffee cups, put it on the back of boarding passes, engrave it in the gate software, teach it in schools as if it were a nursery rhyme with teeth. Done, Calm said, voices bright with the unfair joy of having survived something you might one day turn into a story without lying. Shale Rith requested the channel, as if requesting a dance. Admiral Chen, he said, and her name sounded sharp and respectful in his mouth. When next we meet in a place where neither of us can afford to be kind, I will remember this. I will still try to win, but I will not hire priests to tell me I am beautiful while I do it. Chen let her mouth have the rare luxury of a smile that knew its own limits. I ask for nothing more. I expect nothing less. The chorus, thwarted but never unemployed, drifted outward, already searching for a stage hungrier for applause than truth. The Legiborn filed a stay of collection in whatever courthouse accountants pray to. The relict lingered, then dimmed, leaving only a pressure in the mind like a promise to grade later, which is when the fourth ripple came, and with it the old familiarity Hurst had named but not yet faced. Not an enemy or a judge or a collector, but a mirror. A hull pattern not copied but converged upon. A human signature, shy of human fingerprints. Admiral, the Paradox whispered, we have a cousin. Its name resolved last after the outline and before the implication. A hull not matte black like the Paradox, but a deep, uncommitted gray, fewer hard edges, more slender seams, a garden in its heart like the Paradox's intent bay, but emptier, as if someone had planted rows and then neglected to seed them. No flags, no apology ritual hanging ready like a fire extinguisher on the wall. HSS hypothesis. Hurst's hand found the console without meaning to. Prototype, he said, A parallel line someone else built when we did and chose different rituals. Captain on unknown, Chen said on open channel, keeping fear out of her voice by putting duty where fear wanted to sit. Identify and state doctrine. A voice answered that rasped with youth taught by secrecy. We are here to observe success. No apology, no bone conduction gentleness. The words moved like engineers move when they are eager to be right in front of a board. Who holds your leash? Chen asked, because every ship is a pronoun. The necessary, the hypothesis said. Hurst's throat went dry. He had tried that adjective once and burned it out of his vocabulary when he learned how it behaved. Cousin, he said softly across a human-only whisper band. Did you bring an apology? Did you bring a ledger? Did you bring a kill switch we don't control? We brought a cleaner field shape, the hypothesis said. Yours preserved too much dignity in the subject. We model faster compliance if humiliation is stronger. We model fewer wars if we publish less and act more. There it was, the slope every noble tool finds and must refuse to slide. The relict's presence thickened, not as judge, but as witness whose eyebrows rise very, very slowly. The legiborn licked its stylus. The chorus, to its credit, hovered in honest curiosity, like a rival listening for a better chord. Admiral, Hurst said, request permission to conduct a demonstration for our cousin. Chen's answer carried steel for bone. Granted, with me as lead, Paradox Open School, they did not deploy a field, they deployed a room. The intent bay projected itself on wideband as a space any mind could stand in. No screens, no gunmetal, no banners, a table, 3 chairs, a white page. Tamsin Aleinka's picture on the wall not had geography, just a reminder that someone without rank had once written a paragraph that kept monsters in people's pockets small. Hurst entered and sat. Shale Rith entered to his own surprise and stood. Vraxian pride rarely bends at tables. Chen remained outside the projection because power does not always fit in chairs. Hypothesis, Hurst said, looking at the empty third seat. Come argue, not with lasers, with pen. The hypothesis hesitated, then manifested a presence. No body, just a voice at the seat timbre made of efficient permutations of etiquette. We argue that shame accelerates compliance. We argue that secrecy reduces sabotage. We argue that you wasted leverage on decorum. Hurst tapped the page. Write your doctrine, then sign it, with your dead's names under yours. Silence, then, we have not chosen which dead to spend yet. There it is, Shale Rith said, a savage little pity in his tone. You do not know your bill, so you spend like a prince with a priest. Chen finally sat, the projection accepting her as if chairs remembered admirals of all species with bad backs. You can build 10 ships like you, she said to the empty gray hull. You can win 7 wars I will lose, and you will buy a century where every child learns to measure their breath against your permission. Then you will learn that force is a seed with your face in it. The hypothesis considered the grammar of that last sentence like a machine tasting cinnamon. We acknowledge the risk. We assign it a discounted rate. Then let me show you a rate you cannot discount, Hurst said, and pressed his palm to the console. The ship asked him a private question, and he gave it a public answer. The room populated with faces, blurry to protect privacy, clear enough to hurt, humans and Vraxians and Salari and others, moments after they had not died because a field had preferred inconvenience to blood. A mug not shattered because it took 4 seconds longer to fall. A pilot not crashed because a status light delayed him enough to double-check a latch. A child asleep because freight arrived not with panic but with the calm of lorries late by law. Anecdote, the hypothesis said, but more softly than it wanted. Ledger, the paradox corrected, showing the lines, numbers that did not prove everything but proved enough to reduce certain kinds of honesty to arithmetic. We paid the bill we wrote, we asked others to sign theirs, we published, and we gave them a knife that can cut us. The kill switch protocol floated above the table like a sting and a comfort. The hypothesis reached for it, the gesture of a mind that longs to touch a taboo, and paused. If I take this, it said, and carry no apology, I become a tyrant with a better failsafe. Worse, Chen said, because command requires more cruelty than kindness uses. You become a tyrant that knows it is good because it can be stopped. That is the sweetest poison. The relict hummed approval into the background noise the way mountains hum approval at bridges that respect rivers. The Legiborn closed a book with a resigned snap. No windfall today. The chorus sang a small, rueful chord. Even they could admire a speech that broke a better actor open. The hypothesis dimmed and brightened, not cloak, but thought. Your doctrine is expensive. Say it with us, Hurst replied, as if teaching a child a prayer he hoped the child would one day rewrite. Expense, not victory. A long pause, then, I will sign conditional. I keep my field sharp. I keep my silence when I must. But I will wear your ledger like a stone in my shoe. I will carry your kill switch even if I never give it out. And when your relict grades us, I will take the mark. Not enough, Chen said, and the table tensed like a muscle around a broken bone. You will name your dead before you use it the first time. You will apologize first. You will announce your cost before your triumph, or we will name you enemy and make a ruin out of your efficiency. A silence that counted its own seconds. Then, agreed. Under the Khazar sun's bright indifference, the hypothesis wrote its name under Article 3 and stiffly, as if its stylus had bones, under Article 1. It scrawled a placeholder list on Article 4 and left the room. Cousin, Hurst said into the quiet it left, welcome to the family we are trying to deserve. The convoy cleared the gate. The corridor dissolved like dew. The paradox sagged into its chosen slowness. Schedules wrecked in boring ways for months to come. Coffee would cool. Doors would think. Lovers would learn patience that made kisses specific. 1,000 small costs that bought no parade and funded no statue. On the Vraxian flagship, Shale Rith gathered his officers. We have witnessed a mammal theater that was not theater, he said. We will be mocked if we repeat it. We will be worse if we do not. He signed the Ale Inca Convention and posted the recorded vote where his rivals could feast. Pride made a shape in his chest that surprised him. It felt like a well-trained animal, not a god. In a schoolroom somewhere down lane, a teacher held a gyroscope and told a class, perfection is a rumor. Wobble is freedom. Today we learned how to pay for wobble without pretending it was free. The child from the freighter raised her hand and said, solemn as planets, I gave them my game lag. The class murmured awe. The teacher put a gold star on a ledger that wasn't about grades. The relict faded, leaving a whisper, we will watch. The Legiborn found new clients in less honest wars. The chorus wrote a biting review and quietly plagiarized 2 lines. The hypothesis sailed away with a pebble in its shoe it would never be able to ignore. On the paradox, Hurst visited the picture on the wall. Tamsin, he said, today we made your font famous. He slept poorly that night, not from fear, but because sleep sometimes stutters when you have asked the universe to move differently for a while. He woke early and brewed coffee that was slightly too cool and drank it anyway and called it delicious because it tasted like a bill paid. Admiral Chen stood in the observation blister, watching the Khazar system shrink into a complexity so ordinary it could hide 1,000 small braveries. Expense, she said, testing the shape again. It fit the mouth and the moment. Expense, Hurst echoed. Not victory, she finished, and let the words become the ship's prayer. The war, when it came again, as it always does, wearing a new coat, would meet a species that had taught itself to love being slow together more than it loved being fast alone. That species would still fail, and often. It would still embarrass itself, but it would have a ledger it could read out loud. And when the clock froze some future day, when another hull slid out of math with a god's arrogance and a child's need, the galaxy would have a treaty to shove in its mouth. Apologize. Publish. Pay, share, be stoppable. The second hand moved, not faster, not slower, just honestly.